Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Untangle Tech Talk series. Today, we'll be going through some of the advanced networking features with NG Firewall. This includes port forwarding, NAT 101 rules, VoIP configurations, VLANs, and VRRP configuration, along with some other topics that John will discuss. My name is Shannon Miles, and I'm part of the product marketing team here. I'll be your host today. John Coffin is here as well. He's our Director of QA, and he will be going through the demonstration and answering any questions along the way. So just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. If you do have any audio issues, please make sure you're selecting the correct audio preference on the right-hand side. If you do select to use a phone, you will need to dial in and use the access code provided. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so you can rewatch or revisit or share this video later on. We'll be sending a follow-up email within 24 hours with the link. And of course, we'll be answering questions throughout this demonstration. So as always, please submit your questions to the Q&A box on the right-hand side. We have a couple staff members on hand to help answer any questions. And if we don't get to your question or you have a very specific question in terms of your network setup, you can always email us at sales@untangle.com or support@untangle.com. Now, before I pass this on to John, just want to reiterate that this is a highly technical webinar. So if you are not familiar with Untangle or our solutions or any networking concepts, then I would suggest you take a look at our 101 webinar series. Those cover more higher level topics. And as always, you can find a full list of our webinars on our website. And as I mentioned, John's going to be going through some advanced features that we feel are important, but if you have any specific advanced features that you would like John to showcase or cover, please just ping us in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to show those. So with that, I'll pass it over to John.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to kind of really touch just a few areas of advanced networking. There's so many areas that we probably couldn't cover them in the 30-45 minutes we have. So just a couple of, the most popular advanced networking features we're going to cover is port forwarding, how to get your port forward set up and direct that to whatever servers you want to provide services down to the internet. How to use NAT rules when you have multiple IPs, public IPs, and you only want to use specific ones for special services. VoIP configurations. Most offices today don't use conventional phones. They're using VoIP. There's some special configurations to enable the best performance across the firewall. Some of the other things that we're going to look at is high availability, and that's the ability to create a series of untangles that will act as failovers in case one either stops working or the hardware fails, or and that way you have complete high availability of being able to connect to the internet. And without any, it's all automatic switching. One of the last items is VLANs, which is quite popular and often misunderstood how it works. So we'll cover all those areas, and if there's a specific one, please put it in the question box, and we'll try to get to that. We're also looking at feedback on this particular topic. If there's areas that you might be more interested in seeing covered in the future. So with that, let's start with port forwarding. Port forwarding just means that you're going to allow access to devices behind your Untangle, whether it's an FTP server or a web server or maybe some kind of database. And you want to have some control over the access to that. So what we'll do is create a port forward, and these port forward is the one thing to remember is you can only port forward one address to one port. So it's what I mean by that is that you can have multiple port forwards as long as they go to different ports, or if you're going to use the same port, they have to have a different IP. but you can have the same type of service going to the same port on one address. So we'll get over that. So here in my example, I'm doing my external IP. I'm going to port forward a web server, which is port 80. And in this case, I'm going to port forward it to .10, which is my web server. But I'm also going to use that same IP and port forward FTP, which is port 21. And that's actually going to be, even though it's going to use the same external address, it's going to have a different internal address. And let me show you how that's configured. So I'll go over to my config and then networking. And then we have our port forward rules. So, so I'm going to say I'm going to do my web server, for instance. And you'll notice it comes pre-populated with some of the more basic ideas that I'm going to use. So I put all my all the information here is ready to go. If I were to do a secured server, I would do port 443, things like that. So in this case, I'm just going to do port forward 80, and then my new web server is this is the internal IP. So now I've been able to port forward any connection that comes to the outside of my Untangle, which is destination local. It's coming to the Untangle. And if it comes on port 80, I'm going to go ahead and forward that to my web server. Now let's say I'm not going to use a standard port just to make it less obvious to traffic, but I still want to have it open to most people. I can do a custom port. Like I can say my new destination port. So anyone coming in on one of my WAN IPs to port 8080 is going to be redirected to the standard web port of 80. So the port that you're serving up internally does not have to be the one external. But generally, this is what you're going to have. Generally, it's the same port on both ends. So we can clean it done. So then I'm going to go ahead and I have an FTP server also. So in this case, I'm going to use the same address. So same address, it's going to be any IP I have on my WAN of my Untangle. And I'm going to use port 21. In this case, I have a different web FTP server. So I'm going to go ahead and send this to my other server, which is going to be the FTP server. And in this case, that's the way I'm done. So I'll go ahead and save those, and I'm all set. So what happens if you have separate IPs for these services? So I'll go ahead and I'm going to say, well, I'm not going to use my Untangle IP. I'm going to actually use a different IP that's on my Untangle, but it's not the primary address. So in this case, what I'll do is delete my destination local, and I'm going to add a new one, destination address. So let me just go back here. So what's important is that I'll go ahead and add that new IP to my external. So let me switch this to static, so I can actually add an alias here. So I have another IP address for my box. So let's make this 144. Oh, let's go with 38. And that's my, so I'll go ahead and now I have this external address, and I'll go ahead and add that to my web server. So instead of destination local, I'm going to change that. So I have two IPs now on my Untangle WAN. I have 37, which is the management IP, and I've also added a second IP, which is 38. So I'm going to go ahead and say my destination. If someone comes in to my WAN, but on the second IP, which is 144.38, we're going to forward to my web server. So if people are going to my regular IP of my Untangle, they will not get to my web server. They have to go on this special IP that I've added to my WAN interface as an alias. So there we go. We have that done. Some of the other things you can do, let's say I have a corporate web server. I don't want the public accessing it. So what I can do, I can modify my Untangle port forward rules to limit the IPs that go to that particular one. And we'll just wait for that to go. Okay. So right now I have no limitations on who can access my web server. Anyone striking the internet can come through. So what I can do, I can say, well, I only want the remote office to have access to this box besides the people in my office. So I'll say, okay, I know the address of that box. So it's so the web address of my other office is this. So now I've made this rule where if anyone goes to this IP, they have to come from this IP in order to access the web server. Otherwise, they will not have access at all. It'll just be strictly unable to access remote service. So this way you can restrict services to specific IPs. Let's say you have some critical infrastructure, and you only want access to your IT people at home. You can get their IPs from their home addresses and restrict the port forwards to those machines based on source address. Really, that's kind of the basics of port forwarding. One thing that kind of, let me go ahead and get out of this. So some of the rules to remember about port forwarding. The less conditions, the better it is. So you don't want to go in and put so many things, so many rules to this that you're going to basically make it hard to troubleshoot. So start with the simplest case, generally with one that's configured when you add it. So if I add this, this is really all the rules that you're going to need. Unless you have something specific, like you want to restrict access, or you only want it to come on a specific IP address, things like that. But in general, you just want to use destination local, have a protocol, and then select what port you're going to port forward to. Simple rules, the better. We talked about securing the port forward access by using source address. One of the things, there's called what's known as a hairpin port forward. That's what happens when someone inside your office is using, for example, a URL that goes to your Untangle in order to access a web service that's also on the inside of the network. So one of the things you can do to avoid, that does work on Untangle. Like if someone goes to the outside IP address of this on port 80, they will get redirected to the inside port. But all that traffic is going through your Untangle. And a lot of times it's not necessary to have local traffic, basically loop back through the Untangle. So one of the things you can do is use your DNS server, and let's say, your web server is, www.example.com. So you want to go ahead and put the address, the local address of that box. So in this case, it's 10.2. So this way, when people inside my LAN, they won't have to go through the Untangle, because it'll do a DHCP lookup. It'll say, oh, this is where I want to go, and this is the internal address for it. So this will only happen to the people inside the LAN. People on the outside on the internet will access that internet by the regular IP address.
Hey, John.
Yes.
There's a couple questions that are popping up. If you create a port forward rule over one alias, do you need to create a one-to-one NAT rule as well?
So it's not necessary, but the way it works is that, let's say in this case, I'm using this alias right here. Yeah, the destination address. So when the traffic comes back out, it's going to go through whatever IP address it came in through. So it will go through that some. But if you want to assure, and this is the best thing, and this is one of the other topics that we'll cover later on, and we'll go ahead and cover it now since it's relevant. So I want to go ahead and make sure all my traffic goes through that. So I'm going to say, you know, my web server. So I want to create a condition, and I'm going to say when the source address, and I want to make that my web server. Source address is that I want to go ahead and do a custom, and that means anything coming from the IP is going to go out a specific IP address, and I'm going to make it the same IP address as my as I set up for the thing. So here we are. So this means all the traffic coming from my web server is going to go out this alias, and that's the best practice to do. So anytime you're going to use an alias, it's best to go ahead and make sure the same IP address is set up on an alias, and that shows you how to set it up. It's real straightforward. Basically, you're just saying what is the source address, what is the machine on my LAN, and what IP address do I want it to go out on the WAN. And this should, of course, work with whatever interface that you're set up with. So I set up the IP address right here in aliases. In some cases, that could be a separate WAN. So let's say if I set up this second connection as a WAN and it has a different IP, I could actually have it go out that other IP, other WAN by just setting the IP of this particular WAN. So it's kind of useful. We have a couple of ways of port forward rules are very difficult to, they're not very difficult, but they can get really confusing how it's working. And we do have some good troubleshooting things. Like one of the things are actually is using Session Viewer. You can actually see the traffic come in or the traffic going out and making sure it's following the rules that you have in there, and that can kind of tell you. We also have a really good troubleshooting guide. If you just go Untangle and then port forward troubleshooting. It's really a nice step-by-step on how to troubleshoot your particular port forward rule. And that's just on our wiki. You can do a quick search for that.
John, we have a couple other questions. Can you add secondary public IPs on each interface?
Yes. So any WAN interface, you can set up what's known as aliases, and that's what I did right here. So you just add an alias. So this particular interface has two IPs. It has a 144.37 and a 38 IP address. So there's two IP addresses on that interface, and I can use those for port forwards also. And you can also set up a second WAN. If you have a second ISP with a different set of IP addresses, internet addressable IP addresses, you can go ahead and set up a second WAN, and you can port forward from either one. And you can set up your NAT rules to go back out those interfaces also. Yeah, so troubleshooting. Again, NAT to NAT rules. If you want to dictate what IP address or what interface you're going to go out, and you always remember the NAT rules are for traffic going out the interfaces. So you're going to direct it to go out a specific IP or a specific WAN, and those will help you through that. And they really go in line with port forwards. Like, of course, if you only have one IP or one interface, there's not much reason to use one-to-one NAT. But if you're using aliases, for example, which we talked secondary IPs, you'll use a one-to-one NAT and go ahead and put them in alias in, and then also in the NAT rules, configure your NAT rule. So this particular machine will always go out this particular interface. So any other hot topics on port forwarding or NAT?
I think you've covered most of it. A lot of them are very similar questions. I think you've covered, and our team on hand is helping answer the questions as well. So.
Okay, great. We'll go on to next. So VoIP, probably one of the most common problems that people call into support with. They're setting up a new VoIP system, or they're installing Untangle, and they have an existing VoIP system, and they're having problems. First of all, the biggest thing I can say is bypass VoIP. And so what you want to do is either set up your phones with static IPs, or if that's not possible, go ahead and go to your DHCP server, find your phones in here. Generally, they're in one MAC address because most of the phones are usually in an office or all the same type. So they're really easy to find by MAC address, because a vendor of phones will have all the same first octals of MAC addresses. I would go ahead and assign static IPs. Super easy. Just find your phones, click the plus. It'll put that into the static DHCP service. So those phones always get the same IP addresses. Go ahead and save that. And what I do is actually configure my phones so they're in the same address space. So like the first one, I'll put in the 200 space. The next one I will put into the 201, 202, so forth. Just put them in the same grouping so it's easier to do rules. And then what I'll do is configure our rules to say, VoIP phones, and I'll say I want my source address. That's the wrong one. So I say source address is I'll say 192.2, and I'll say from 200 to 250, for example. So for my 25 phones, they're all going to be in this range, whether I have them or not. I know I'm going to go in my DHCP server and make those, give those phones addresses in that range. And I'm going to say bypass. So let's see. Oh, typed that in wrong. So I'm going to bypass the range of this range of IPs because I know all my VoIP phones are going to be in there. I'll go ahead and save that. So now Untangle is not going to, it's going to route that traffic, but it's not going to inspect it. So it's less chances of getting jittery, or one of the more common things you'll hear is like, I can hear them, but they can't hear me. That's because, Untangle is doing an inspection because it's going through the normal route, and it's causing a one-way communication. So the best thing to do is bypass the phones from your Untangle, and it'll be able to go through there without any interruptions, because it's very important that all the bytes of the VoIP call go in the same order, so you get the phone call without any weird interruptions in the voice. Really, that's the basics on that. It's just set up your DHCP configuration so that the phones get the same IP every time, and then bypass those IP addresses, and you should have no problems with your VoIP system.
Hey, John, we have some questions on VoIP. Is it best practice to have VoIP dedicated to its own interface?
It's not necessary. I've actually installed several configurations on fairly large offices, and all traffic and regular are going through there. One of the good things to do is go into your advanced settings and QoS, and make sure QoS is enabled. And I also create a rule, which is actually in here by default. I didn't realize that. It's going to give high priority to your VoIP calls. So VoIP calls will take priority going out that interface over regular internet traffic, which is web browsing or email. Make sure the QoS is enabled, and also make sure that your bandwidth is correctly set. And please do not take the word of your ISPs. They tend to fidget those numbers. Actually do a test on your ISP's modem and see what your true bandwidth in both directions is. Because if these numbers are wrong for your total bandwidth, it's going to definitely make a lot of problems with QoS. QoS is relying that they will absolutely get this amount of bandwidth, and then they pass out the bandwidth based on the rules that you provide in here. So that's the best practice. Make sure your QoS is on, bypass the IPs of your VoIP phones, and it should work without any problems going through the same interface your regular traffic is going through.
We have another one. Can VoIP be set up by MAC addresses instead of IP addresses?
You can. Let me see. I think that was added in this, or we're looking to add that in. No, unfortunately, it looks like bypass rules are only by IP address. What you can do is actually the next topic is you can put your phones on a separate VLAN, and then you can do it by source interface. And I'll show an example of that, since that was good timing on that question. So VLANs is just another interface on the Untangle. It just happens to be going through the same wire. So specifically on phones, so I'll go ahead and let's make a new VLAN. So I'm going to create a new VLAN. I'm going to call it my VoIP VLAN. And the parent interface is going to be my internal. And really tag is just the number you're going to give it. So I'm going to give it a number of 10. It's going to be address. I'm going to give it a static. Let's make this 7 and then 1. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a regular range. And I'm going to go ahead and enable DHCP to make sure my phones get IP addresses. So what was that range again? 7. So I'll go ahead and give out IP addresses. and we'll go ahead and leave that alone. So I just made a new VoIP ID. As soon as I save it, I'll give it. Oh yeah, I didn't finish my QoS, so I need to finish that or it won't save. Back to here. Go ahead and save these. So now I'm going to have a new VoIP interface. So what I would do with my VLAN is either configure all my phones to have that particular VLAN ID, which was 10, the VLAN 10. So I can, I know this configuration on most Polycom phones that you can put a VLAN address in there. Or I would configure my switch to be a VLAN 10, and that way all the phones that are plugged in there will automatically travel over my VLAN 10. And then I can just particularly bypass the entire interface. So if I go over here to my bypass, I can make a new rule now and say add a condition, and it's going to be my source interface. And you'll notice I missed the name of it. Let's see here. Interface. Called VoIP. Bypass rules. For some reason, it's not showing up on that. Anyways, I would just add my source interface, and that would be my VoIP. So all my VoIP traffic would be bypassed in that case. And really, that's what it amounts to. A VLAN is a separate interface, but it travels through the same wire. And the way it separates the traffic is by this tagging of the VLAN traffic. So the traffic is basically encased in a label, and that label is the VLAN tag. So that's a way of separating your traffic if you want to separate the phones from the regular computer traffic, but they're actually going through the same interface. Bandwidth-wise, it's about the same on the wire, but it allows you to do special rules like bypassing the entire VLAN, so you're able to see that. But in a nutshell, that's really VLANs. VLANs is a good way of separating traffic and not having to rewire your network. It's really what it comes down to. Next topic. So kind of running. So VRRP is a networking term for requiring what's known as a master and slave. So in this case, we'll set up one Untangle that's going to be the primary. And all the traffic is going to go through that, but it's going to have what's known as a ghost interface, and that's the VRRP interface. And this ghost interface automatically switches from whichever box is first primary, and second if it's receiving a heartbeat from the other ones. So the other ones will constantly heartbeat the primary one to see if it's still alive. If it's not, it will take this ghost interface and put it on itself. So the network will not see any difference because it's, as far as it knows, it's going to the same interface. But what machine it's on is different. So this is a typical setup. So you'll have two untangles with one ghost interface. Now the key thing is here for how many routers you're going to put in this VR configuration. You need the number of routers plus one IP addresses. So in this case, I have two untangles, so I need 3 IPs. So I need an IP for the first untangle, I need an IP for the second untangle, and I also need an IP for the ghost interface. Same thing on the LAN. The LAN is usually not as critical because you can make up your own set. But when you do get IPs from your provider, make sure you get enough IPs if you plan to do VRRP. And I find the best way to keep the two untangles in sync is by using Command Center, and we have a whole topic on that. And you're able to push out all your policies out. So I would take this and make this the primary, and then push out all my policies to the second one. So they're always in sync, even though they're not being used. And really, there's nothing you have to do when this machine stops running. It will automate the secondary machine or third. You can have up to 200 of these lined up. So it will automatically switch to the next one and cascade down until it runs out of boxes that are seeing the heartbeat. Super easy to configure. I recommend drawing the network diagram like this and actually putting the IPs, because it can get confusing when you actually go to implement that. In a case like this, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go to our WAN interface, and we'll go ahead and set up our VRP. We'll enable that. We're going to give this a number. So in this case, it's just an ID. So this will be 1. This will be the priority, and the higher number is a higher priority. So generally, the first box you want to do like 100 or 90, and the second box you'll probably do like 50. So you want to do large gaps like that. That way, in case you want to put more machines in there, and depending on the hardware, you want to make it more reliable than the other, you have room to insert it in between. Really easy to do. And then you give it the alias for it. So I'm going to say I have this IP from my ISP, and I'll give it this IP, and this is going to be my ghost IP. So when services come to when I set up services for my machine, this is the IP I want to set up with my domain or my public DNS. So as they come into this IP, which box it's on is strictly up to the boxes figuring out which box is working and which has a higher priority. So traffic will always travel through the highest priority one. It won't switch like midstream. What happens when the primary box gets back online, everything will automatically switch over back to the primary. There's really no switching. There's nothing you have to do. There is a master icon that will show up to tell you right here is master. This will glow green when you have it enabled, and it's currently the master. So you can tell which machine is being used at the time. It's a quick way in case you're looking for you're like, oh, I think one of the machines is down, and you can find out. You can also set up an email alert to tell you that it switched VLANs. That's really the thing. Really keep in mind that, again, it's almost like having, in a case where 2 machines, you actually have a third machine. And where it resides on which physical box is just depending on weight and if the box is up. So remember, just draw the diagram, put the IPs, it'll be much clearer, and you won't get any confusion. Again, if you do have problems with this, do tell us. Just post on the forums. Myself or one of the other engineers are on there. We can definitely resolve your problems. These are kind of problems, though, requires kind of a network diagram to be posted so you know what to put on there.
Hey, John, there's some questions about licensing, if another license is required for VRRP.
Yeah, so VRRP does not, it's actually a free product. For the second box, if whatever products you have running on that, you will need a second license on the second box right now. What we recommend to a lot of people is put a lot of the free items, free apps on the secondary and or third box. So your traffic will still flow, and you're able to switch the license over until you can figure out what's wrong with the primary box. So it's a little bit more work, but it will provide that. But ideally, you would have 2 licenses, 1 on each box. So you have all the same apps on all the VRRP boxes that you have, where it's the primary or secondary. But if a budget is a kind of a concern, you can just put the free products on the second one. So when you do switch over, at least you have some protection on your network until you figure out what's going on in that.
Okay, thanks, John. Someone would like a little bit more information about how WAN failover works with port forwarding, NAT, and VRRP.
So on port forwarding, the IPs, so if you have WAN failover and you have 2 interfaces, generally you'll have your domain set up for 1 IP. And you can set up like a round robin where it go different interfaces depending on what which DNS. I mean, it's really common out in the internet for more high demand areas like Google. You could, you do a search for Google and you'll see like 3 or 4 IPs for that. So on WAN failover, if 1 IP is down, it will redirect that traffic through the interface that's still up. If you do have a NAT rule, it will not provide internet access to that box because you're saying you only want traffic going out of that box. Also, if you have the IP of an interface that is down, the internet traffic only knows how to get to your box through that 1 IP. If that IP of that interface is down, of course it won't be able to get to your services. So what you can do is make things a little more flexible and actually have 2 pull forward rules, 1 for each interface, so people can come in on either interface to that box. In those cases, you do not want to have a NAT rule because it will reply back on the same interface it came in. So those are the kind of cases if you want like a high availability website, you don't want to have a NAT rule. But the problem is you get into, it's like you don't know what IP address traffic will come into. So there's plus and minuses about both ways. So in short, the WAN failover really doesn't provide any magic. It does allow boxes to go over the interface that is open, and else they have a NAT rule. In those cases, if the interface that the NAT rule is connected to, the traffic won't go out.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. There's one more question. Do all IP addresses have to be in the same subnet for VRRP?
Well, there's a couple of cases. First of all, they do have to be in the same subnet because they have to come from the same ISP. You can't have multiple ISPs with the VRRP. You can have multiple WANs going to different ISPs, but each one of those WANs will be set up with a separate VRRP. So you always need to get 3 IPs minimum from your ISP to set up a VRRP. And troubleshooting, I can't suggest more. Session Viewer, huge help. Tells you exactly what's going on in your network, where the traffic's coming from. So definitely use that. Forums. I think we're one of the few companies where you can speak to the developers directly via the forums on if you're having problems. Dirk and myself are on there all the time trying to answer questions. try to provide, if you're having networking issues, try to provide a simple networking diagram. It will help us troubleshoot your problem quite a bit. And that is about it.
Thanks, John. It was a very good technical webinar. If you have any questions remaining, please submit them in the Q&A box. We'll see if we have a little bit of time to answer those. If this was a complete confusion for you or way beyond your technical expertise, we do offer professional services. So if you do have a very specific instance or just need help installing or configuring, let us help you. We want to make sure that your network is set up correctly. So just let us know. You can contact us at sales@untangle.com for more information. Go to the next slide, John, please. And as always, John mentioned, we have the wiki and the forums, and our sales and support team is here. Let's see if there are any other questions. If you want pricing for professional services, please contact us at sales@untangle.com. It's also on our website. Let's see, we have a couple of webinars coming up, July 25th in a couple weeks. It's a 101, which is a more higher level webinar, managing BYOD with Captive Portal. That's one of our applications. And then August 3rd, if you're new to Untangle or know someone that hasn't heard of Untangle, is interested in us, or just want a little bit more information, we have an intro to Untangle NG Firewall, which might be of use to you. Yeah, so thank you so much, John. If we didn't get to your question, again, we tried. Please email us, and we'll be able to answer those questions for you. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day, everyone. Thanks, John.